Let's return now to the COVID vaccination rollout and the politics wrapped up with that. Joining us live is political consultant Jim Middleton. Jim, good to see you. Keen for your take on the COVID four-phase plan that we saw the Prime Minister unveil last Friday. Some people are saying this is great, this is exactly what we need, a pathway out of COVID. It's all hinging on the vaccination rollout. Others are saying there's so little detail in terms of an actual time frame, firm dates, firm targets for vaccination, that we're not really any better off. What's your view?
Good afternoon, Ash. Look, oddly enough, I think both camps are correct. Yes, we do need a plan. But secondly, it would have been a lot better had we got some of the detail that is yet to be determined somewhat earlier than where we're at now. It was very interesting to hear, for example, the head of the vaccine rollout, General Fruin, suggesting this morning that there are supply constraints. And one very clear piece of evidence as far as that's concerned is that you'll notice that when we had the big last lockdown in Victoria, vaccine take-up was very, very rapid indeed. Now, there's been a similar increase in the take-up in New South Wales, but not nearly as much as happened in Victoria, and that is clearly a consequence of supply constraints. And it's interesting that General Fruin's not prepared at this stage to commit to when additional amounts of Pfizer, let alone Moderna, might be available for the Australian population. And it's interesting to note on that front that other countries, Singapore, for example, has plenty of supply of these other vaccines. So what went wrong in Australia in terms of getting our hands in a pretty competitive market to these choices that we now don't have? So I do think that's one interesting, or one of the interesting factors here. The other thing that I would say is this, that I now find it very difficult to see how the Prime Minister can call an election with our international borders open. Imagine if the borders were open and we had a situation in the middle of an election campaign like we had last week, with borders around the country, not just in Sydney, but in the Northern Territory, Western Australia, South Australia, all being shut down and lockdowns occurring. It would make the Prime Minister's ability to bid for re-election very, very difficult indeed. And that brings on the other side of the equation, which is business, of course, does want to open up and as rapidly as possible. But who's to blame for this? Is it the Prime Minister or is it the states? I predict that the Prime Minister will be doing everything he possibly can to blame the states if there's any delay in opening up. On the other hand, I imagine the states will be saying, well, if it fixed up the borders, got the vaccines into the country, we wouldn't be in this situation. It's your fault, not ours. So a very interesting dynamic, I think, emerging politically over the months leading up to the end of the year and into next year, if indeed that's when the election will be held.
Yeah, it sounds like we can look forward to the blame game continuing on that front, Jim. Just on another matter, you would have heard Andrea Crothers' report just a few minutes ago regarding Julia Banks. She's made an allegation about a cabinet minister who would no doubt be feeling pretty nervous today after she alleged that a cabinet minister sexually harassed her in Parliament. Another example, of course, in a string of examples we've heard about this year, but also Julia Banks' description of the way that Scott Morrison handled her decision to leave Parliament. She really didn't miss, didn't she? She's accused him of being a bully, of gaslighting her. That could be pretty damaging stuff for the Prime Minister.
Look, in general terms, I would have to say that what Julia Banks is saying fits with what other senior female Liberals have intimated to me over time about the way they are treated within the coalition. I don't know about the details, and it's quite fair, as Matt Canavan said also in Andrea Crothers' report, yes, she would be criticised for deserting the Liberal Party, but the behaviour that she's talking about preceded that time, and the behaviour that she's accusing the government and the Prime Minister of in particular, she says were part of what led to her decision to leave the Liberal Party, not run again and sit as an independent. It's also worth noting, isn't it, that what we've seen in the Bowman pre-selection over the last 24 hours. This is the seat that was held by Andrew Laming. He's leaving under a cloud. And there was a pretty strong field of 4 women and 1 man. The man, what's his name? Henry Pike, I think, has a bit of a checkered past himself, and yet he won pre-selection. It's already drawn criticism publicly from one Liberal, that is Bridget Archer from Tasmania, and off the record from others. On the other hand, Labor is not entirely blameless as far as this is concerned. There's an interesting contest going on in South Australia. Alice Dawkins, daughter of Keating-era Treasurer, who's trying to run in Spence, the seat that Nick Champion's leaving, and a safe seat. She, among other things, is making the point that women on both sides of politics find it harder to get pre-selected for safe seats. And there does seem to be some evidence from reports and investigations by academics that that's true. But to go back to the original point, what Julia Banks is saying does tie in and tally with what I've heard around the traps from senior Liberal women over the years.
Yeah, still clearly a long way to go. Jim Middleton, appreciate your analysis. Thank you.
My pleasure as always, Ash.